The Wedding Sabotage in Napa Valley. Chapter 1. The morning before the wedding. The sun rose over Napa Valley, California, casting a golden glow across the sprawling vineyards that stretched toward the horizon. At the heart of the valley, a luxurious villa buzzed with activity. Its manicured gardens and ivy-clad walls a perfect backdrop for a wedding. Inside, Helen Fortifandi stood in the grand living room, clipboard in hand, her auburn hair pulled into a tight bun. She adjusted a vase of peonies, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. Today was her daughter Emily's wedding day, and nothing, absolutely nothing could go wrong. Helen had spent months planning this event, determined to uphold the family's image as the picture of perfection. Upstairs, Emily, 20, stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection framed by the soft morning light filtering through the window. Her white lace gown hugged her slender frame, the train pooling elegantly behind her. She smiled, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. But a flicker of nerves danced beneath the surface. She was marrying Chris, the man she'd loved for 3 years. A charming entrepreneur with a warm laugh and a steady presence. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Downstairs, David, 47, lingered near the kitchen, sipping coffee, his tie loose around his neck. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, but his brow was furrowed, his thoughts elsewhere. Last night, he'd received a text from an unknown number. "I know what you did 10 years ago." The words had haunted him through a sleepless night. He'd dismissed it as a prank, but the unease lingered, a shadow over the day's joy. He glanced at Helen, who was barking orders at the caterers, and forced a smile. She couldn't know not today. Mark, 25, Emily's younger brother, slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone. His dark hair was tousled, his expression sour. He'd never liked Chris, suspecting the man's charm was a facade for ulterior motives. Mark had overheard Chris on a call last week, talking about securing a future, and it didn't sit right. He glanced at Emily as she descended the stairs, radiant in her gown, and felt a pang of protectiveness. If Chris was hiding something, Mark would find out before the vows were spoken. "Everything's on schedule," Helen announced, checking her watch. "The guests arrive at noon. Ceremony at 2. Reception at 4. Emily, you look stunning." She kissed her daughter's cheek, her smile tight but genuine. Emily beamed, adjusting her veil. "Thanks, Mom. I can't believe it's finally here." Helen nodded, her mind already racing to the next task, ensuring the string quartet was set up in the garden. David approached Emily, his smile strained. "You're beautiful, sweetheart," he said, pulling her into a hug. She hugged him back, oblivious to the tension in his shoulders. "Thanks, Dad. I'm so glad you're here." Her words stung, a reminder of the secret he'd buried a decade ago, an affair during a business trip in Seattle. A fleeting mistake he'd ended quickly. He'd thought it was behind him, but the text suggested otherwise. He pushed the thought aside. Focusing on his daughter's joy, Mark stood, pocketing his phone. "I'm gonna check on the setup outside," he muttered, brushing past Chris as he entered the room. Chris?" Thedded, looked polished in his tuxedo, his blonde hair neatly styled. "Morning, Mark," he said, his tone friendly. Mark grunted, barely acknowledging him, and headed for the garden. Chris raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. Turning to Emily, "You ready for this?" he asked. Taking her hand, she nodded, her smile widening. More than ever, as the morning unfolded, the villa filled with the hum of preparation. Florists arranging centerpieces, photographers snapping candids, and the scent of fresh pastries wafting from the kitchen. Helen moved like a general, directing staff with precision, her focus unbreakable. But beneath her composed exterior, she felt the weight of expectation. The family's reputation in their affluent social circle depended on this day being flawless. She couldn't afford a single misstep. Emily slipped away to the balcony, needing a moment to breathe. The vineyards stretched out before her, their rows of vines shimmering in the sunlight. She closed her eyes, imagining the life she and Chris would build, nights of laughter, shared dreams, a family of their own. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, expecting a message from a friend, but the words froze her blood. "Your dad had an affair, and your groom doesn't love you." A friend? Her heart pounded, her hands trembling as she reread the text. An affair. Her dad. And Chris. How could he not love her? She thought of their late-night talks, his gentle reassurances during her doubts. The message had to be a lie, a cruel prank. But the seed of doubt took root, gnawing at her. She glanced at David, now helping Helen adjust a tablecloth, his smile forced. Could it be true? And Chris, who was laughing with a groomsman, could he be hiding something? Emily tucked her phone into her pocket, her joy tainted by suspicion. She couldn't tell Helen not yet. Her mother would dismiss it as nonsense, too focused on perfection to entertain doubt. But Mark, he'd listen. She found him in the garden, inspecting the chairs lined up for the ceremony. "Mark," she whispered, pulling him aside. "I need to show you something." He frowned, sensing her distress. She handed him her phone, the message glowing on the screen. Mark's jaw tightened as he read, his suspicions about Chris flaring. "This is bad." He said, his voice low. "Dad and Chris, we need to figure out who sent this." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "But don't tell Mom. She'll freak out." Mark agreed, his mind already racing. If Chris was playing his sister, he'd regret it. Inside, David felt his phone vibrate again. Another message from the unknown number. "Confess, or I tell everyone." His stomach churned, sweat beading on his forehead. He deleted the text, his hands shaking. Who knew? A colleague, an old fling. He couldn't risk it coming out, not today. Not in front of their friends, their family, their entire social circle. He forced himself to focus, joining Helen to greet the first guests, his smile a mask. Helen noticed his distraction, her sharp eyes narrowing. "David, what's wrong? You look pale," she said, adjusting his tie. "Just nerves," he lied, forcing a chuckle. "Big day for our girl." Helen nodded, accepting the excuse, but a flicker of unease stirred in her gut. She pushed it aside, turning her attention to the arriving guests, determined to make this day perfect. Emily stood in the garden, her veil fluttering in the breeze, her smile faltering as she watched her family. Her father's secret, her groom's intentions, everything she'd believed in, felt fragile, ready to shatter. The vineyards stretched around them, their beauty a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. This was supposed to be her day, but someone was determined to ruin it. She wouldn't let them, not without a fight. The chapter closed with the villa alive with anticipation. The ceremony hours away. Emily clutched her bouquet, her eyes darting between David and Chris, doubt creeping into her heart. Mark watched from the sidelines, his protective instincts on high alert. Helen orchestrated the day with precision, oblivious to the cracks forming in her perfect world. And David, haunted by his past, felt the weight of his secret grow heavier with each passing minute. The wedding was about to begin, but so was the unraveling of everything they held dear. Chapter 2, The Second Message. The villa in Napa Valley hummed with the energy of wedding preparations, the scent of roses and freshly cut grass mingling in the air. Emily stood in the garden, her white gown shimmering in the late morning light, her hands still trembling from the anonymous text she'd received an hour ago. "Your dad had an affair, and your groom doesn't love you." She'd shown the message to her brother Mark, who now stood beside her, his dark eyes narrowed with suspicion. The ceremony was hours away, but the joy of the day had been tainted, replaced by a gnawing doubt that refused to let go. Mark handed the phone back to Emily, his jaw tight. "This is serious." "Ingob," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid the ears of passing florists. "If Dad really had an affair, that's bad enough. But Chris, I've never trusted him. We need to figure out who sent this." Emily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She glanced at her father, David, who was helping Helen adjust a floral arch near the ceremony site. His smile was forced, his movements stiff. Could the message be true? And Chris, her loving, dependable Chris, could he be hiding something? "I don't want Mom to know yet," Emily whispered, clutching her bouquet. "She'll lose it if this ruins the wedding." Mark agreed, his mind already racing. He'd always suspected Chris had ulterior motives. His charm seemed too polished, his backstory too vague. Mark had overheard Chris on a call last week, talking about needing to secure a future, and it had set off alarm bells. If Chris was using Emily for money or status, Mark would make sure he paid for it. Inside the villa, Helen moved with the precision of a conductor, directing the caterers as they set up the reception tables. Her navy dress was impeccable, her auburn hair still perfectly in place, despite the flurry of activity. She glanced at her watch. 11:00. Mum, the guests would arrive soon, and everything had to be flawless. She caught sight of Emily and Mark whispering in the garden, their expressions tense, but dismissed it as pre-wedding nerves. Her focus was on the event, on maintaining the family's pristine reputation among their affluent Napa Valley circle. David stood near the floral arch, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. The second anonymous text he'd received confess, or "I tell everyone," had sent his heart racing. He'd deleted it immediately, but the words lingered. A constant threat. 10 years ago, during a business trip in Seattle, he'd had a brief affair, a moment of weakness. He'd regretted ever since. He'd ended it quickly, confessed to a therapist, and vowed to be a better husband. Helen never knew, and he'd thought the past was buried. But someone knew, and they were here, watching him. He scanned the villa, searching for a clue. A familiar face, a knowing glance. Was it a colleague, a former friend? He couldn't let this ruin Emily's day, or his marriage. He forced a smile as Helen approached, her clipboard in hand. "The arch looks perfect," she said. her tone brisk. "Guests will start arriving soon. Can you check on the quartet?" David nodded, grateful for the distraction. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the text over and over. Mark, meanwhile, decided to take action. While Emily returned to the villa to touch up her makeup, he slipped upstairs to Chris's room, where the groom was getting ready with his groomsmen. The door was ajar, and Mark peeked inside, spotting Chris adjusting his cufflinks in front of a mirror. His phone sat on the dresser, unattended. Mark waited until the groomsmen stepped out, then slipped in, his heart pounding. He grabbed the phone, quickly scrolling through recent messages. A text from an unknown number caught his eye. "You're almost there. Just secure the deal, and the debt's clear." Mark's blood ran cold. Debt, deal. Was Chris using Emily to pay off some financial mess? He took a quick photo of the message with his own phone, then slipped out before Chris returned. His suspicions were confirmed. Chris was hiding something, and Emily needed to know. Back in the bridal suite, Emily sat at the vanity, her hands unsteady as she reapplied her lip gloss. Her phone buzzed again, and she froze, dreading another message. She opened it, her breath catching. "Your dad's affair isn't the only secret. Chris is in debt, big time. He's using you." The words hit like a punch. Her earlier doubts about Chris now amplified. She thought of his warm smile, his promises of a future together. Could it all be a lie? She needed to talk to him, but the ceremony was so close. Could she confront him without ruining everything? Mark burst into the room, his face flushed with urgency. "I checked Chris's phone," he said, showing her the photo of the text. "He's in debt, and someone's telling him to secure the deal." "He's playing you?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "He wouldn't. He loves me." But the evidence was damning, and her trust in Chris wavered. Downstairs, Helen greeted the first guests, her smile radiant as she welcomed Napa Valley's elite winemakers, business moguls, and socialites. She was in her element, playing the perfect hostess. Oblivious to the storm brewing within her family, David joined her, his nerves fraying with each new arrival. He kept his phone close, dreading another message, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of the anonymous sender. Emily, still reeling from Mark's discovery, found Chris in the hallway, his tuxedo pristine, his smile warm as he saw her. "You look incredible," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled back, her voice trembling. "Chris, we need to talk. Are you in debt? Is that why you're with me?" His smile faltered, confusion flashing across his face. "What? No, Emily, I love you." "Where is this coming from?" Mark stepped forward, his tone icy. "We saw your texts. Secure the deal." "What deal?" Chris's eyes widened, his composure cracking. "That's not what you think," he said, his voice rising. "I'm not using her. I'd never." But Emily cut him off, tears streaming down her face. "Then explain it, Chris, because right now I don't know what to believe." The argument escalated, their voices echoing through the villa, drawing Helen's attention. Helen rushed over, her smile fading as she saw Emily's tears. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Emily wiped her eyes, struggling to speak. "I don't know if I can do this. Mom, there's too many secrets." Helen's heart sank, her perfect day slipping away. She turned to Chris, her eyes blazing. "What did you do?" Chris raised his hands, pleading. "Nothing! I swear, I love her." David watched from the sidelines, his own secret weighing heavier with each passing moment. The anonymous texts, Emily's tears, Mark's accusations the wedding was unraveling, and he feared his past was the root of it all. The vineyards outside glowed in the midday sun, their beauty a cruel contrast to the chaos within the villa. The ceremony was approaching, but so was the truth, threatening to shatter everything. The chapter closed with Emily retreating to the bridal suite, her gown trailing behind her, her heart torn between love and doubt. Mark stood guard, determined to protect his sister, while Chris pleaded his case to Helen, who was on the verge of canceling the wedding. David clutched his phone, the threat of exposure looming larger than ever. The day was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. Chapter 3. Chaos in the Preparations. The Napa Valley Villa was a whirlwind of activity as noon approached, the vineyards outside shimmering under a cloudless sky. Inside, Helen stood in the grand foyer, her clipboard now a lifeline as she directed the final preparations. The string quartet tuned their instruments in the garden, their notes floating through the open windows, while caterers rushed to set up the champagne tower for the reception. Helen's navy dress was still pristine, but her composure was fraying at the edges. She'd just witnessed Emily's tearful confrontation with Chris, and the sight of her daughter's distress had shaken her. This was supposed to be a perfect day, her perfect day, and yet something was terribly wrong. Emily sat in the bridal suite, her white gown pooling around her as she stared at the anonymous texts on her phone. The first message, "Your dad had an affair, and your groom doesn't love. You had been bad enough." But the second, received just moments ago, cut deeper. "Your dad's affair isn't the only secret. Chris is in debt big time. He's using you." Mark's discovery of Chris's text about securing the deal had confirmed her worst fears. She wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara, and tried to steady her breathing. She couldn't marry Chris, not like this, not with these doubts. But the thought of canceling the wedding, of facing the guests, her mother's wrath, it was too much. Mark paced outside the suite, his mind racing. He'd always distrusted Chris, and the text on Chris's phone was proof the guy was trouble. But the anonymous messages about their dad, that was another layer of betrayal. He glanced at David, who was now in the garden, helping the florist adjust a garland. David's forced smile, his nervous glances, Mark could see the guilt written all over him. The affair, if true, would devastate Helen, and Mark wasn't sure he could keep it from her much longer. Helen stormed into the suite, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. "Emily, what is going on?" she demanded, her voice a mix of concern and frustration. "You're crying. Chris looks like he's about to bolt, and the guests are arriving. This is your wedding day." Emily looked up, her green eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice breaking. "Someone sent me these messages about Dad, about Chris. I don't know who to trust." Helen's face paled as Emily handed her the phone. She read the messages, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, tossing the phone onto the vanity. "A prank. Emily, someone's trying to ruin your day." You can't let them. But her voice lacked conviction, her mind flashing to David's odd behavior all morning. The late-night phone calls, his distracted demeanor was their truth to the message. She shook her head, refusing to entertain the thought. "You're getting married in 2 hours," she said firmly. "We're not canceling for some anonymous nonsense." Emily's shoulders slumped, her resolve crumbling under her mother's pressure. "But what if it's true?" she whispered. Helen softened, sitting beside her. "Then we'll deal with it after the wedding. Right now, you need to focus on you and Chris. Don't let this ruin your happiness." Emily nodded, but the doubt lingered, a heavy weight in her chest. Outside, David felt his phone buzz again, but he didn't dare check it, not with Helen so close. He'd deleted the second message, "Confess," or "I tell everyone," but the threat loomed larger with each passing minute. He needed to find the sender, to stop this before it destroyed everything. He scanned the arriving guests, searching for a clue. Was it someone here? A friend? A colleague? He spotted a familiar face, Lisa, a former colleague who'd once hinted she knew about his Seattle trip. Could it be her? He made a mental note to talk to her later, away from Helen's watchful eyes. Mark, meanwhile, decided to dig deeper into Chris's intentions. He slipped into the villa's study, where the wedding planner had set up a temporary office, and used her laptop to search Chris's name online. A quick scan revealed a recent article about Chris's startup, a failed venture that had left him with significant debt. Mark's suspicions solidified. Chris was broke, and marrying into their wealthy family could be his way out. He needed to tell Emily, to stop the wedding before it was too late. Emily emerged from the suite, her makeup fixed, her expression a mask of determination. She couldn't let her mother down. Not after all the effort Helen had put into this day. But as she descended the stairs, she caught sight of Chris in the foyer, laughing with a groomsman. His ease a stark contrast to her turmoil. The anonymous text echoed in her mind. "Chris is in debt. He's using you." She needed answers. Now, she approached him, her voice low but firm. "Chris, we need to talk, alone." He followed her to a quiet corner of the garden, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" "Need what?" he asked, reaching for her hand. She pulled away, her eyes searching his. "Are you in debt? Is that why you're marrying me, to fix your financial problems?" Chris's face fell, a mix of shock and hurt flashing across his features. "No, Emily, I love you. Yes, I have debt. My company failed last year, but I'd never use you. How could you think that?" Mark interrupted, his voice cold. "We saw your texts. Chris, secure the deal. Explain that." Chris's eyes widened, his composure cracking. "That was about a business loan I'm trying to get. To start over. It has nothing to do with Emily." But his explanation felt hollow, and Emily's trust wavered. "I need time to think," she said, turning away, her heart aching. Helen, now in the garden, greeting guests, noticed the tension between Emily and Chris, but forced herself to focus on her duties. The string quartet began to play, a soft melody that belied the chaos unfolding. She spotted David near the ceremony site, his phone in hand, his face pale. She marched over, her patience wearing thin. "David, what's going on with you?" she asked, her voice sharp. He fumbled with his phone, accidentally dropping it, and the screen lit up with the anonymous text. "Confess, or I tell everyone. Helen's breath caught, her eyes narrowing as she read the message. What is this? She demanded, snatching the phone. David's heart sank, his voice trembling. It's nothing, Helen, a prank. But her expression hardened, doubt creeping into her mind. The perfect wedding she'd envisioned was slipping through her fingers, and the secrets threatening to unravel her family were only beginning to surface. The chapter closed with Emily standing alone in the garden, her gown catching the breeze, her mind a storm of doubt. Mark watched Chris, his protective instincts on high alert, while Helen confronted David, her trust in him beginning to crack. The guests continued to arrive, oblivious to the drama unfolding, their laughter a cruel contrast to the family's turmoil. The ceremony was an hour away, but the truth was closing in faster. Chapter 4. An Unexpected Guest. The Napa Valley Villa was a vision of elegance as the clock struck 1. The garden now filled with the soft hum of arriving guests. Rows of white chairs faced a floral arch, the vines of the surrounding vineyards glowing in the afternoon sun. The string quartet played a gentle melody, setting a romantic tone for the ceremony that was just an hour away. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, the family was unraveling, their secrets threatening to derail the day Helen had so meticulously planned. Helen stood at the entrance to the garden, greeting guests with a practiced smile, her navy dress a stark contrast to the pastel elegance around her. She'd just seen the anonymous text on David's phone, confess, or I tell everyone, and though he'd dismissed it as a prank, doubt gnawed at her. She'd always trusted David, believed in their perfect marriage. But his nervous behavior today, the tension in his eyes, made her question everything. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on her role as hostess. But the unease lingered, a shadow over her carefully curated day. Emily lingered near the villa's entrance, her white gown catching the breeze, her hands clutching her bouquet so tightly her knuckles were white. The anonymous messages, "Your dad had an affair and Chris is in debt," big time echoed in her mind, amplified by Mark's discovery of Chris's text about securing the deal. Chris had denied using her, claiming the debt was from his failed business. But the doubt persisted. She glanced at him, now mingling with guests, his smile easy, but his eyes darting to her with concern. Could she marry him with these questions unanswered? Mark, meanwhile, was on a mission. He'd watched Chris closely since their confrontation, but his focus shifted when he spotted a new arrival. A woman in her early 40s, her dark hair swept into a chic updo, her emerald dress striking against the pastel crowd. She wasn't on the guest list. Mark was sure of it. He approached her as she accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter, her movements graceful but guarded. "Hi, I'm Mark, Emily's brother," he said, extending a hand. "I don't think we've met." The woman smiled, her eyes sharp. "I'm Lisa," she said, shaking his hand. "I used to work with your dad. I heard about the wedding and thought I'd drop by." Mark's instincts flared. David had been a tech executive for years, and Lisa's presence felt too coincidental after the anonymous texts. "That's nice of you," he said, keeping his tone casual. "How long did you work with him?" Lisa's smile tightened. "Oh, a while back. We did a project in Seattle together." The mention of Seattle sent a chill down Mark's spine. Emily's second anonymous message had mentioned a woman in Seattle, David, who'd been helping the photographers set up near the arch. Froze when he saw Lisa. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the stone path, drawing Helen's attention. "David, what's wrong?" she asked, rushing over, her voice sharp with irritation. He stammered, "Nothing, just clumsy," but his eyes were locked on Lisa, who waved at him with a knowing smile. Helen followed his gaze, her suspicion deepening. "Who is that?" she demanded, her tone icy. "An old colleague," David said, his voice tight. "I didn't know she was coming." Helen's eyes narrowed, the anonymous text flashing in her mind. "An old colleague from where?" she pressed. David hesitated, his mind racing. "Seattle," he admitted, the word heavy with implication. Helen's face hardened, her hands clenching her clipboard. "We'll talk about this later," she said, turning back to the guests, but her mind was spinning. Seattle was that, where the affair happened. She couldn't confront him now, not with the ceremony looming, but the doubt was suffocating. Emily, who'd been watching from the villa's entrance, saw the exchange between her parents and felt her stomach twist. The anonymous message had mentioned Seattle, and now this woman, Lisa, showed up, claiming a connection to her dad. She approached Mark, who was still talking to Lisa, and pulled him aside. "What did she say?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Mark's expression was grim. "She worked with Dad in Seattle. I think she might be the one sending the texts." Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Ask your dad about the woman in Seattle." Her breath caught, her eyes darting to David, who was now avoiding Lisa's gaze as he helped the caterers. The message confirmed her worst fears. Lisa was connected to the affair, and the sender knew it. She needed to talk to her dad, to hear the truth from him. But the ceremony was so close, and the guests were already taking their seats. Mark decided to confront Lisa directly. He approached her again, his tone firm. "Why are you really here, Lisa? Did you send those messages to my sister?" Lisa's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold. "I came to celebrate Emily's wedding." "Excuse me." She walked away, heading toward the parking lot, her departure sudden and suspicious. Mark watched her go, his mind racing. She was hiding something, and he needed to find out what. Inside, Helen pulled David into a quiet corner of the villa, her voice low but furious. "What's going on?" "David, who is that woman? And why is she here?" David's hands shook, his voice barely a whisper. "She's just someone I worked with." "Helen? I don't know why she's here," but his lie was weak, and Helen saw through it. "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "That text on your phone? Confess. Or I tell everyone's. What does it mean?" David's face paled, his silence damning. Helen turned away, her heart pounding. She couldn't deal with this now, not with the ceremony about to start. But the cracks in her marriage were widening. Emily, still reeling from the latest message, approached David in the garden, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "What happened in Seattle? Who was the woman?" David's eyes widened, his face draining of color. "Emily, this isn't the time," he stammered, glancing at the guests taking their seats. But Emily pressed. "It is the time. Someone's trying to ruin my wedding." and I need the truth." David hesitated, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake. 10 years ago, in Seattle, I had an affair. It was brief, and I ended it. But I never told your mom?" Emily's breath caught, tears welling in her eyes. "How could you?" she whispered, stepping back. Before David could respond, Helen appeared, having overheard the confession, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. "You what?" she said, her voice barely audible, her world shattering as the music swelled for the ceremony. The chapter closed with the family on the brink of collapse. The ceremony moments away. Emily stood frozen, torn between her love for Chris and the betrayal of her father. Helen stared at David, her perfect day in ruins, while Mark watched from the sidelines, determined to uncover Lisa's role. The guests waited, oblivious to the drama, as the string quartet played on. The notes, a haunting backdrop to a wedding on the verge of disaster. Chapter 5. The ceremony begins. The garden in Napa Valley was a vision of romance as the clock struck 2:00 p.m. The sun casting a warm glow over the rows of white chairs filled with elegantly dressed guests. A floral arch framed the aisle, its roses and peonies a burst of color against the backdrop of sprawling vineyards. The string quartet played a soft rendition of Pachelbel's canon in D, the notes floating through the air, signaling the start of the ceremony. But beneath the picturesque scene, the family was in turmoil, their secrets unraveling faster than the petals falling from the arch. Emily stood at the entrance to the aisle, her white gown shimmering, her veil trailing behind her like a whisper of hope. Her hands clutched her bouquet, the stems digging into her palms as she tried to steady her racing heart. Moments ago, her father, David, had confessed to a decade-old affair in Seattle, confirming the anonymous text she'd received that morning. The betrayal stung, a wound made worse by her mother Helen's reaction. Helen had overheard, her face crumpling with shock and hurt before storming off. And then there was Chris, her groom, standing at the altar, his blonde hair catching the sunlight, his smile warm but strained. The anonymous messages claimed he was in debt and using her, a suspicion Mark had fueled with evidence from Chris's phone. Emily didn't know who to trust anymore, but the ceremony was starting, and she had to walk down that aisle. Helen stood at the back of the garden, her clipboard discarded, her navy dress a stark contrast to the pastel elegance around her. Her eyes were red, her composure shattered by David's confession. She'd spent months planning this wedding, pouring her heart into every detail to maintain the family's perfect image. But now that image was a lie. Her husband had betrayed her, and her daughter's happiness was at stake. She wanted to cancel the ceremony, to confront David in private. But the guests were watching, their whispers already beginning as they noticed her distress. She forced herself to stand tall, her hands clenched at her sides, determined to get through this day for Emily's sake. David stood beside Helen, his face pale, his tie askew, the weight of his confession pressed down on him. The anonymous texts, "Confess," or "I tell everyone now," a reality he couldn't escape. He'd hoped to keep his affair a secret, to protect his family, but the truth had slipped out, and Helen's reaction was worse than he'd feared. She wouldn't look at him, her silence more damning than any words. He glanced at Emily, who was taking her first steps down the aisle, her expression a mix of determination and doubt. He'd failed her, failed them all, and the guilt was suffocating. Mark stood among the groomsmen at the altar, his dark eyes locked on Chris, who waited for Emily with a nervous smile. Mark's confrontation with Lisa, the unexpected guest who'd worked with David in Seattle, had yielded nothing. She'd denied sending the texts and left abruptly. But Mark wasn't convinced. He'd seen her talking to their Uncle John, a quiet man who'd always been close to Helen, and suspected John might be involved. Mark's focus shifted as Emily approached, her steps slow, her gaze flickering between Chris and their parents. He could see the turmoil in her eyes, and his protective instincts flared. If this wedding went ahead, he'd make sure Chris didn't hurt her. Emily reached the altar, her breath shallow as she took Chris's hand. His touch was warm, familiar, but the anonymous message, "Chris is in debt, big time. He's using you," echoed in her mind. She looked into his blue eyes, searching for the truth. But all she saw was love. Or was it an act? The officiant began the ceremony, his voice a distant hum as Emily's thoughts raced. She couldn't do this, not with so many questions unanswered. She squeezed Chris's hand, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to know. Chris, are you really in debt? Is that why you're with me?" Chris's smile faltered, his eyes widening with panic. "Emily, not now," he whispered back, glancing at the guests. But Emily's resolve hardened. "Yes, now. I can't marry you if I don't trust you." The officiant paused, sensing the tension, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Chris hesitated, then nodded, his voice low. "I told you. Yes, I have debt, but I love you. I'm not using you. Please, let's get through this, and I'll explain everything." Emily's heart ached, torn between love and doubt. She wanted to believe him, but the anonymous texts, Mark's evidence, her father's betrayal, it was too much. She glanced at her parents, standing at the back, their faces a mix of pain and shame. Helen's eyes were fixed on the ground, her hands trembling, while David looked like he might collapse under the weight of his guilt. Emily couldn't do this. Not like this. Mark, sensing her hesitation, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the music. "Emily, you don't have to do this," he said, loud enough for the guests to hear. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Helen's head snapped up, her face a mask of horror. "Mark, stop," she hissed, rushing forward. But Emily raised a hand, her voice steady despite her tears. "I need a moment," she said, turning to Chris. "I'm sorry." She pulled away, her gown trailing behind her as she fled down the aisle, the guests whispering in shock. Chris called after her, his voice desperate, but she didn't stop. Heading for the villa's quiet library, Helen chased after her, her heels sinking into the grass, her perfect day in ruins. "Emily, come back," she shouted, but her daughter disappeared inside, leaving chaos in her wake. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The anonymous texts, now the least of his worries. He'd broken his family, and there was no undoing it. Mark, still at the altar, turned to Chris, his tone icy. "If you've hurt her, I'll make sure you regret it," he said, before following Emily. Chris stood alone, the officiant awkwardly clearing his throat, the guests buzzing with speculation. The ceremony was on hold, and the truth was closing in. Helen reached the library, finding Emily crumpled on a chaise lounge, her veil askew, her face buried in her hands. "Emily, what are you doing?" Helen demanded, her voice a mix of anger and despair. "You can't just walk away from your own wedding." Emily looked up, her eyes blazing. "I can't marry him with all these lies." "Mom, Dad had an affair. Chris might be using me. I don't know who to trust anymore." Helen's heart sank. The weight of her husband's betrayal hitting her anew. She sat beside Emily, her resolve crumbling. The perfect facade she'd built finally shattered. The chapter closed with the villa in disarray. The ceremony halted, the guests whispering among themselves. Emily sat in the library, her gown a stark contrast to her tear-streaked face. While Helen grappled with her own pain, Mark stood guard outside, determined to protect his sister, while Chris waited in the garden, his future with Emily hanging by a thread. David remained in the crowd, his secret exposed, his family fractured. The wedding was on the brink of collapse, and the saboteur's work was far from done. Chapter 6. The ceremony disrupted. The Napa Valley garden, once a picture of romance, was now a scene of chaos as the halted wedding ceremony left guests whispering in their seats. The floral arch stood untouched, its roses drooping slightly in the afternoon heat, while the string quartet sat in awkward silence, their instruments idle. The vineyards stretched endlessly around the villa, their beauty a cruel mockery of the family's unraveling. Emily had fled the altar moments ago, her white gown trailing behind her as she sought refuge in the villa's library, leaving Chris standing alone, his face a mask of desperation. The anonymous texts, her father's confession of an affair, and the doubts about Chris's intentions had broken her. She couldn't marry him. Not like this. Helen chased after Emily, her navy dress catching on the grass, her heels sinking into the earth. Her heart pounded with a mix of anger and despair. This was supposed to be her daughter's perfect day, the culmination of months of planning, a testament to their family's pristine reputation. But David's confession, overheard just before the ceremony, had shattered her world. An affair. 10 years ago in Seattle, he'd betrayed her, lied to her for a decade. She reached the library, finding Emily crumpled on a chaise lounge, her veil askew, her face streaked with tears. "Emily, what are you doing?" Helen demanded, her voice trembling. "You can't just walk away from your wedding." Emily looked up, her green eyes blazing with hurt. "I can't marry him. Mom, not with all these lies. Dad had an affair. Chris might be in debt and using me. I don't know who to trust anymore." Helen's breath caught, the weight of David's betrayal hitting her anew. She sank onto the chaise beside Emily, her hands trembling. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He never told me." Emily reached for her hand, their shared pain a fragile bond in the midst of chaos. Outside, David remained in the garden, slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. The anonymous texts confess, or "I tell everyone" had forced his hand. But he hadn't expected Helen to overhear his confession to Emily. Her reaction, the cold fury in her eyes, had gutted him. He'd kept the affair a secret to protect his family, but now that secret had destroyed them. He glanced at the guests, their whispers a constant hum, their judgment a weight he couldn't bear. He needed to fix this, to make things right, but he didn't know how. Mark, meanwhile, had followed Emily to the library but stopped outside, his protective instincts on high alert. He'd left Chris at the altar, his threat still ringing in the air. If you've hurt her, I'll make sure you regret it. But his focus shifted when he remembered Lisa, the unexpected guest who'd worked with David in Seattle. She'd left abruptly after his confrontation, but he'd seen her talking to their Uncle John, Helen's brother, just before she departed. John had always been quiet, reserved, but fiercely protective of Helen. Could he be the saboteur, using Lisa to expose David's affair as revenge for hurting his sister? Mark found John in the crowd, standing near the floral arch, his gray suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. "Uncle John," Mark said, approaching him, his voice low but firm. "I saw you talking to Lisa earlier. Did you know about Dad's affair? Are you the one sending those texts to Emily?" John's eyes widened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he masked it with a frown. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mark," he said, his tone clipped. "I was just catching up with Lisa. She's an old friend." But Mark wasn't convinced. She mentioned Seattle, and the texts to Emily mentioned Seattle too. "If you're trying to ruin this wedding to get back at Dad, you need to stop. Emily doesn't deserve this." John's jaw tightened, his voice cold. "I'd never hurt Emily. If you're looking for someone to blame, look at your father." He turned away, but Mark grabbed his arm, his voice a hiss. "I'm not done with you." John pulled free, walking off into the crowd, leaving Mark with more questions than answers. Back in the library, Emily wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. "I need to talk to Chris again," she told Helen, standing and adjusting her veil. "I need to know the truth, all of it, before I can decide what to do." Helen nodded, her own pain momentarily set aside for her daughter's sake. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. They returned to the garden, where Chris was waiting near the altar, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his face pale with worry. "Emily," Chris said, stepping forward as she approached, his voice desperate, "please, let me explain everything. I love you. I'd never use you." Emily held up a hand, her voice firm. "Then tell me the truth, Chris, all of it, right now." Chris took a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers. "My company failed last year, and I'm in debt about $200. I've been working with a lender to secure a loan. To start over, that's what the deal in the text was about. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry, especially not today. But I swear, I'm marrying you because I love you, not because of your family's money." Emily searched his face, wanting to believe him, but the doubt lingered, a shadow cast by the anonymous texts and Mark's suspicions. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling. Chris's shoulders slumped, his voice raw. "I was ashamed. I wanted to fix it on my own, to be the man you deserve. I'm so sorry." Helen watched, her heart aching for her daughter, but her own anger at David made her skeptical of Chris's sincerity. "You should have been honest," she said, her tone sharp. "Secrets destroy families, I should know." Mark, who'd been watching from the sidelines, approached John again, determined to get answers. "If you're not the one sending the texts, then who is?" he demanded. John sighed, his resolve cracking. "I knew about the affair," he admitted, his voice low. "David told me years ago, begged me not to tell Helen. I wanted him to confess, to stop living a lie. I might have told Lisa, but I didn't send those texts, Mark. I swear." Mark's eyes narrowed, but he believed John's sincerity. If not him, then who? The guests, growing restless, began to whisper louder, their curiosity turning to impatience. Helen, realizing the wedding couldn't proceed like this, took Emily's hand. "We need to decide what to do," she said, her voice firm. "Either we continue, or we cancel, but we can't keep everyone waiting." Emily nodded, her heart torn. She loved Chris, but the lies her father's, the anonymous senders, and Chris's omissions were too much to bear. The chapter closed with the family at a crossroads, the ceremony in limbo. Emily stood in the garden, her gown a symbol of a dream now tainted, while Chris waited, his future with her hanging in the balance. Helen grappled with her own betrayal, her trust in David shattered, while Mark vowed to uncover the saboteur, his suspicions now shifting to Lisa. The vineyards glowed in the fading light, their serenity a stark contrast to the storm within the villa. The wedding was far from over, and the truth was still out there, waiting to be revealed. Chapter 7. The Truth About Chris. The Napa Valley garden was a sea of whispers as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rows of white chairs now half empty. The floral arch stood abandoned, its petals wilting in the late afternoon heat, a silent witness to the halted wedding ceremony. Guests milled about, their murmurs of speculation a constant hum, while the string quartet packed up their instruments, their music no longer needed. Inside the villa, the family grappled with the fallout of secrets exposed. Their perfect day in tatters. Emily stood in the garden near the altar, her white gown catching the breeze, her veil still askew from her tearful retreat. Chris faced her, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his blonde hair disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. Moments ago, she'd demanded the truth about his debt, spurred by anonymous texts and Mark's discovery of a message on Chris's phone about securing the deal. Her father's confession of an affair had already shattered her trust in her family, and now Chris's secrets threatened to break her heart. "Tell me everything!" "Chris," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tears brimming in her green eyes. "No more lies." Chris took a deep breath, his blue eyes locked on hers, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. "I've been in debt since my company failed last year," he admitted, his voice raw. "It's $200. I've been working with a lender to secure a loan to start over." That's what the deal in the text was about. A loan to pay off the debt and rebuild my life. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry, especially not today. But I swear, I'm marrying you because I love you, not because of your family's money." Emily searched his face, wanting to believe him. She thought of their late-night talks, his gentle reassurances during her doubts, the way he'd held her through every storm. But the anonymous messages, "Chris is in debt, big time. He's using you," had planted a seed of doubt that refused to die. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If you loved me, you'd have been honest." Chris's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. "I was ashamed. I wanted to fix it on my own. To be the man you deserve. I'm so sorry." Helen stood nearby, her navy dress a stark contrast to the pastel elegance of the garden. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her own heart was in pieces after David's confession of an affair, and Chris's admission only deepened her skepticism. "You should have been honest from the start," she said, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowing. "Secrets destroy families, I should know." She glanced at David, who stood at the edge of the garden, his face pale, his guilt a visible weight. Helen's trust in him was shattered, and she wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. Mark, who'd been watching the exchange, turned his attention back to his Uncle John, Helen's brother, whom he'd confronted earlier. John had admitted to knowing about David's affair, but denied sending the anonymous texts that had upended the wedding. Mark believed him. John's guilt had been genuine, but that left the question of the saboteur unanswered. Lisa, the unexpected guest who'd worked with David in Seattle, was still his prime suspect. But she'd left after their confrontation. Mark needed to find her, to confirm her role. But first, he had to ensure Emily was okay. He approached Emily and Chris, his protective instincts on high alert. "I mean, do you believe him?" he asked, his voice low, his dark eyes searching her face. Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering between Chris and her brother. "I want to," she said, her voice soft, "but I need time to think." Chris nodded, his expression pained but understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said, stepping back, giving her space. "I'll be here." Helen, still reeling from David's betrayal, took Emily's hand, her voice firm. "We need to decide what to do about the wedding," she said, her tone a mix of exhaustion and determination. "The guests are waiting, and we can't keep them here forever." Emily nodded, her heart torn. She loved Chris, but the lies her father's, the anonymous senders, and Chris's omissions were a heavy burden. She needed clarity, and she needed her family to be whole again. Mark, meanwhile, sought out John again, finding him near the villa's entrance, sipping a glass of champagne, his gray suit still impeccable despite the chaos. "Uncle John," Mark said, his voice low but urgent, "you said you told Lisa about Dad's affair. Why? And who else did you tell?" John sighed, setting down his glass, his expression weary. "I told Lisa years ago. After David confided in me," he admitted, "I was angry he'd hurt my sister, and he didn't even have the guts to tell her. I thought Lisa might convince him to come clean, but she didn't. I never told anyone else. Mark, I swear." Mark's eyes narrowed, but he believed John's sincerity. "Then it has to be Lisa," he said, his resolve hardening. "She's the only one who knew, and she showed up here uninvited. I'm going to find her." John nodded, his voice quiet. "Be careful, Mark. If she's behind this, she's got her own agenda." Mark turned away, his mind racing. He needed to track Lisa down, to stop her before she caused more damage. Inside the villa, Helen and Emily returned to the library, needing a moment away from the guests' prying eyes. Helen sank onto the chaise, her hands trembling as she looked at her daughter. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Your father—" "I thought we had a perfect marriage." Emily sat beside her, taking her hand. "We'll get through this, Mom," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I need to know if Chris is telling the truth. And we need to find out who's doing this to us." David approached the library, his steps hesitant, his face etched with guilt. He knocked softly, his voice low. "Helen, Emily, can I come in?" Helen's eyes flashed with anger, but Emily nodded, needing to hear from him. David entered. His shoulders slumped. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant for this to come out. Not like this. I ended the affair. Helen, I've spent every day since trying to be the husband you deserve." Helen's voice was cold, her pain raw. "You should have told me. You let me live a lie for 10 years. David nodded, tears in his eyes. But Helen turned away, unable to look at him. The chapter closed with the family in disarray. The wedding on hold. Emily sat with Helen, her decision about Chris still uncertain, while Mark prepared to hunt for Lisa, determined to unmask the saboteur. David stood alone, his confession a weight he couldn't escape. The guests outside growing restless. The vineyards glowed in the fading light, their beauty a stark contrast to the storm within the villa. The day was far from over, and the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. Confronting Uncle John. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the Napa Valley villa, the vineyards stretching toward the horizon, their beauty a cruel contrast to the chaos within the family. The garden, once set for a romantic wedding ceremony, was now a scene of disarray, with chairs scattered and guests milling about, their whispers of gossip a constant hum. The floral arch stood abandoned, its petals falling like tears, while the string quartet had long since packed up, leaving an eerie silence. Inside the villa, the family grappled with the fallout of secrets and lies, their perfect day shattered by anonymous texts and hidden betrayals. Emily stood in the villa's library, her white gown crumpled from sitting, her veil discarded on the chaise beside her. Her mother, Helen, sat next to her, her navy dress wrinkled, her auburn hair coming loose from its tight bun. The revelation of David's affair had broken Helen, her trust in her husband shattered, and Emily's doubts about Chris had only added to the pain. But Chris's explanation, his debt was from a failed business, not a scheme to use her, had softened Emily's heart. She wanted to believe him, to salvage their love. But the anonymous texts and her family's fractures made it hard to see a way forward. Outside, Mark stood in the garden, his dark eyes blazing with determination. He'd just learned from his Uncle John that John had known about David's affair and had told Lisa, the unexpected guest who'd worked with David in Seattle. John had denied sending the anonymous texts that had upended the wedding, but Mark wasn't ready to let him off the hook. If Lisa was the saboteur, John's actions had enabled her, and Mark needed to know why. He spotted John near the villa's entrance, still sipping champagne, his gray suit impeccable despite the chaos. Mark marched over, his voice low but fierce. "We need to talk, Uncle John." Now, John set down his glass, his expression wary. "I told you, Mark." "I didn't send those texts," he said, his tone clipped. But Mark wasn't backing down. "You told Lisa about Dad's affair, knowing it could hurt Mom. Why? And what else do you know?" John sighed, his shoulders slumping, the weight of his actions catching up with him. "I was angry, Mark," he admitted, his voice low. "David hurt my sister, your mom, and he didn't even have the decency to tell her. I thought if Lisa knew, she might push him to confess, to stop living a lie, but I didn't expect this." Mark's jaw tightened, his frustration boiling over. "You didn't expect someone to use it against us, to ruin Emily's wedding. You should have kept your mouth shut." John's eyes flashed with guilt. but he stood his ground. I wanted to protect Helen, not hurt Emily. I'd never do that to her. Mark's voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Then you should have thought about the consequences. Someone, maybe Lisa, is using this to destroy our family. And you helped her. The confrontation escalated, Mark's accusations echoing through the garden, until Helen emerged from the library, her face pale but resolute. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Mark turned to her, his anger spilling over. Uncle John knew about Dad's affair he told Lisa years ago. He might not have sent the texts, but he's the reason this is happening. Helen's eyes widened, her gaze shifting to her brother, her voice trembling. "Is this true, John?" John nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Helen. I thought I was doing the right thing for you." Helen's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "You thought exposing my husband's affair on my daughter's wedding day was the right thing," she said, her voice breaking. "You've ruined everything." John reached for her, but she stepped back, her pain raw. "Stay away from me," she said, turning away, her heart breaking anew. Emily, who'd followed Helen outside, watched the scene unfold, her own pain mirrored in her mother's. She approached Helen, taking her hand. "Mom, we can't keep fighting like this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I need to decide what to do about Chris, and we need to figure out who's behind this together." Helen nodded, wiping her tears, her resolve returning. "You're right," she said, her voice steadying. "But I can't forgive your father, not yet." David, who'd been standing at the edge of the garden, approached hesitantly, his face etched with guilt. "Helen!" "Emily, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice trembling. Emily turned to him, her eyes hard. "You've said enough, Dad," she said, but Helen gestured for him to speak. David took a deep breath, his voice raw. "I know I've hurt you both, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. The affair was a mistake, a brief, stupid mistake. I ended it, and I've tried to be a better man ever since. I didn't tell you, Helen, because I couldn't bear to lose you." Helen's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was cold. "You should have told me, David. You let me live a lie for 10 years. She turned away, unable to look at him, her pain too raw. Emily, however, softened slightly, her love for her father warring with her hurt. "I need time, Dad," she said, her voice breaking. David nodded, tears streaming down his face, and stepped back, giving them space. Mark, still reeling from his confrontation with John, decided to take action. "I'm going to find Lisa," he told Emily, his voice firm. "She's the only one who makes sense as the sender. I'll track her down and get the truth." Emily nodded, grateful for his determination. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft. Mark turned to leave, but not before casting a final glare at John, who stood alone, his guilt a heavy burden. Chris approached Emily, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "And have you decided?" he asked, his voice low. Emily looked at him, her heart aching. "I believe you, Chris," she said, her voice steady. "But I need to be sure about everything. Let's have a smaller ceremony. Just us and the family. After this is all sorted." Chris nodded, relief washing over him. "Whatever you need," he said, taking her hand, his touch a lifeline in the storm. The chapter closed with the family fractured, but determined, the guests still waiting, their whispers a constant backdrop. Emily stood with Chris, her decision to proceed with a smaller ceremony a step toward healing, while Helen grappled with her pain, her trust in David and John shattered. Mark left the villa, his mission clear, while David stood alone, his confession a weight he couldn't escape. The vineyards glowed in the fading light, their serenity a stark contrast to the turmoil within. The saboteur was still out there, and the day was far from over. Chapter 9. Emily's Decision. The sun dipped low over Napa Valley, painting the vineyards in shades of orange and gold, their beauty a quiet contrast to the storm within the villa. The garden, once set for a grand wedding, was now a scattered mess, with chairs overturned and guests departing in hushed groups, their gossip trailing behind them. The floral arch stood alone, its petals scattered on the ground, a symbol of the day's unraveling. Inside the villa, the family stood at a crossroads, their secrets exposed, their bonds tested, but a glimmer of hope emerging through the chaos. Emily stood in the garden, her white gown catching the evening breeze, her veil now tucked away in the library. Chris stood beside her, his tuxedo jacket off, his blonde hair tousled, his blue eyes filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. She'd just decided to proceed with a smaller ceremony, just for the family and close friends. After his explanation about his debt, he'd admitted to owing $200, 000 from a failed business, but swore he wasn't using her. And Emily, despite the anonymous texts and her family's turmoil, chose to believe him. Her love for him, though shaken, was still strong, and she wanted to start their life together on her terms. "I'm sorry for doubting you," Emily said, taking Chris's hand, her voice soft but firm. "But with everything, Dad, the texts I needed to be sure." Chris squeezed her hand, his expression earnest. "I understand. Inko, I should have been honest from the start. Let's do this your way, with just the people who matter." Emily nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Just us, and the family, if they can get through this." Helen watched from the villa's entrance, her navy dress wrinkled, her auburn hair loose and framing her tear-streaked face. Her heart was still raw from David's confession of his affair, and her brother John's role in sharing that secret with Lisa had deepened her sense of betrayal. But seeing Emily's resolve, her determination to salvage her wedding, gave Helen a spark of hope. She approached her daughter, her voice trembling but steady. "If this is what you want, I'll support you," she said, taking Emily's other hand. "But I can't. I can't be around your father right now." Emily's heart ached for her mother, but she understood. "I know, Mom," she said, squeezing Helen's hand. "Just be there for me." "Okay." Helen nodded, wiping her tears, her resolve returning. She'd get through this day for Emily. Even if her own marriage was in pieces, she turned to the officiant, who'd been waiting patiently in the garden, and asked him to prepare for a smaller ceremony at sunset, just for the family and a few close friends who'd stayed. Mark, meanwhile, returned to the villa after a fruitless search for Lisa, the unexpected guest he suspected of sending the anonymous texts. He'd tracked her to a nearby hotel, but she'd checked out, leaving no trace. Frustrated but determined, he decided to confront John one last time, hoping to mend the rift he'd caused by publicly accusing him. He found John in the villa's kitchen, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, his gray suit now rumpled, his face etched with regret. "Uncle John," Mark said, his voice softer now, his anger tempered by the day's events. "I'm sorry for blowing up at you earlier. I know you didn't send the texts, but I was so mad for Mom, for Emily. I shouldn't have done that in front of everyone." John looked up, his eyes weary but grateful. "I understand, Mark," he said, setting down his glass. "I should have kept my mouth shut about your dad's affair. I thought I was protecting Helen, but I only made things worse. I'd never hurt Emily. She's like a daughter to me." Mark nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Let's put it behind us," he said, extending a hand. John shook it, a small smile breaking through his guilt. "For Emily," he said, and Mark agreed, the two men finding a fragile peace. Mark knew the real saboteur was still out there, likely Lisa, but for now, he needed to focus on supporting his sister. David lingered in the garden, watching as the officiant set up for the smaller ceremony, his heart heavy with guilt. He'd tried to apologize to Helen and Emily, but Helen's cold rejection had cut deep, and Emily's need for time was a painful reminder of his failure. He approached them now, his steps hesitant, his voice low. "Emily, Helen, I want to be here for the ceremony. If you'll let me," he said, his eyes pleading. Emily softened, her love for her father still present despite her hurt. "You can stay, Dad," she said, her voice quiet. "But Mom needs space, and so do I." Helen turned away, unable to look at David, her pain too raw. "I'll be there for Emily," she said, her voice cold. "But I can't deal with you right now." David nodded, tears streaming down his face, and stepped back, respecting her boundaries. He'd spend the rest of his life making this right. But for now, he'd give them the space they needed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the smaller ceremony began in a quiet corner of the garden, with only a handful of guests, Emily's best friend, Chris's parents, and a few loyal friends who'd stayed. The officiant spoke softly, his words a balm to the day's wounds, and Emily and Chris exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion. "I promise to love you, to be honest with you, always," Chris said, his eyes locked on hers. Emily smiled, her heart lighter, and echoed his promise, her love for him reaffirmed. Helen stood at the back, her arms crossed, her heart aching, but proud of her daughter's strength. Mark stood beside her, his protective instincts eased by Emily's happiness. Though his mind was still on Lisa, the saboteur he'd yet to catch. John watched from the sidelines, his guilt tempered by the sight of Emily's smile, a small redemption for his role in the day's chaos. David stood apart, his presence a quiet promise to make things right, one day at a time. The chapter closed with the family taking a tentative step toward healing. The smaller ceremony, a symbol of hope. Emily and Chris kissed under the fading light, their love a beacon in the storm, while Helen and David stood on opposite sides of the garden, their marriage in tatters. The vineyards glowed in the twilight, their serenity a quiet promise of healing. But the saboteur was still out there, and the family's journey was far from over. Emily's decision to proceed with a smaller ceremony was a step forward, but the shadows of doubt and betrayal lingered, waiting to be confronted under the Napa Valley sky. The guests who remained Emily's best friend, Chris's parents, and a few loyal friends formed a small circle around the couple, their smiles genuine despite the day's chaos. The officiant's voice was steady, his words a reminder of the love that had brought them here. Emily looked at Chris, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and uncertainty, and slipped the ring onto his finger, sealing their vows. The applause was soft but heartfelt, a moment of light in the darkness. Mark watched from the sidelines, his protective instincts still on edge, but a sense of relief washing over him. Emily was happy, at least for now, and that was enough. He glanced at John, who gave him a small nod. Their earlier reconciliation, a fragile bridge between them. But Mark's mind was still on Lisa. He needed to find her, to understand why she'd targeted his family. He slipped away during the ceremony, pulling out his phone to call the hotel again, hoping for a lead. Inside the villa, the staff began clearing the reception area, their movements quiet as they packed away the champagne tower and floral centerpieces that would go unused. The day had not gone as planned, but Emily's smaller ceremony was a testament to her strength, a reminder of what truly mattered. As the last guest hugged her goodbye, Emily turned to Chris, her smile genuine for the first time that day. "We did it," she whispered, leaning into his embrace. "We're married." Chris kissed her forehead, his voice soft. "I'll never keep anything from you again," he promised, his arms a safe haven. Emily nodded, her heart lighter, but her thoughts drifted to her parents, to the rift that still divided them. She wanted her family whole again, but that would take time she was willing to give, now that she and Chris had taken this step forward. Chapter 10. Reconciliation Under the Sunset. The Napa Valley sky was ablaze with color as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the vineyards in hues of crimson and gold. The villa, once a scene of chaos, was now quiet, the last of the guests having departed after Emily and Chris's smaller, intimate ceremony. The garden was empty, the floral arch dismantled, its petals scattered across the grass like a memory of the day's turmoil. But beneath the fading light, the family stood together, their wounds raw but their hearts open, ready to heal. Emily stood hand in hand with Chris near the edge of the garden, her white gown glowing in the twilight, her veil now tucked away. The smaller ceremony had been everything she'd needed, a moment of love and honesty amidst the chaos. She looked at Chris, her husband now, and felt a quiet peace settle over her. "We made it," she whispered, her green eyes shining with tears of joy. Chris smiled, his blonde hair catching the last rays of sunlight, his blue eyes warm with love. "We did," he said, pulling her close, "and we'll face whatever comes next together." Helen watched from the villa's porch, her navy dress still wrinkled, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. The day had been a nightmare. David's confession of his affair, John's role in sharing that secret, the anonymous texts that had upended everything but Emily's strength had given her hope. She couldn't forgive David yet, not after 10 years of lies, but seeing her daughter's happiness reminded her of what mattered most. She approached Emily, her steps hesitant, her voice soft. "I'm so proud of you," she said, taking Emily's hand. "You handled this day with more grace than I could have." Emily squeezed her mother's hand, her heart aching for Helen's pain. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "but we need to fix this. Our family. I don't want to start my life with Chris without you and Dad being okay. Helen's eyes filled with tears, her resolve wavering. I don't know if I can forgive him, she admitted, her voice trembling. But for you, I'll try. Mark returned to the villa, his search for Lisa finally yielding results. He'd tracked her to a winery down the road, where she'd been drinking alone, her emerald dress now rumpled, her dark hair falling loose. He confronted her, his voice firm but controlled. Why did you do it? Lisa, why send those texts to Emily? Lisa's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't deny it. David deserved to be exposed, she said, her voice slurring slightly. He used me in Seattle, made promises he never kept, then tossed me aside. I wanted him to feel the pain he caused me, and Helen deserved to know the truth. Mark's jaw tightened, his anger tempered by understanding. You hurt my sister on her wedding day, he said, his voice low. That wasn't your place. Lisa looked away, her expression a mix of regret and defiance. I'm sorry for that, she said, her voice softening. I didn't mean for Emily to get caught in the crossfire. Mark nodded, his mission complete. He wouldn't press charges. Lisa's pain was punishment enough, but he made her promise to stay away from his family. She agreed, and Mark left. The weight of the saboteur's identity finally lifted. Back at the villa, Mark shared Lisa's confession with Emily and Helen, his voice steady. It was Lisa, he said, his dark eyes meeting theirs. She wanted revenge on Dad for what happened in Seattle. She's gone now, and she won't bother us again. Emily's shoulders relaxed, a burden lifted. Thank you, Mark, she said, hugging him tightly. You protected us. Helen nodded, her gratitude silent but profound. The saboteur was unmasked, but the real healing was just beginning. Helen turned to John, who stood nearby, his gray suit now rumpled, his face etched with remorse. I'm sorry. Helen, he said, his voice low. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. Helen's eyes softened, her anger giving way to understanding. I know you meant well, she said, her voice quiet. But we need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. John nodded, a small smile breaking through his guilt, and the siblings shared a tentative embrace, their bond slowly mending. David approached Helen, his steps hesitant, his face etched with sorrow. Helen, I know I've hurt you, he said, his voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. I love you, I always have. Helen's eyes filled with tears, her heart torn between pain and the love she still felt for him. I need time, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I don't want to lose us. David nodded, tears streaming down his face, and stepped back, giving her the space she needed. It was a start, a fragile promise of reconciliation. Emily watched her parents, her heart aching but hopeful. She turned to Chris, her husband now, and smiled, the weight of the day lifting. The family gathered in the garden, their silhouettes framed by the setting sun, their wounds still fresh, but their love stronger than ever. Mark stood beside John, their reconciliation a quiet victory, while Helen and David took the first steps toward healing. The vineyards stretched around them, their beauty a quiet promise of a new beginning. The chapter closed with the family united under the Napa Valley sky, their journey far from over, but their bonds unbreakable. Emily and Chris stood hand in hand, their love a beacon of hope. While Helen and David faced an uncertain future, their marriage a work in progress, the saboteur was gone, the truth laid bare, and the family was ready to heal, one day at a time. The sunset cast a warm glow over the villa, a symbol of closure and the promise of tomorrow.